Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. So we're going to do a bit of a SHTF roll call because there are some major developments going on around the world, both in the realm of kinetic warfare as well as deepening geopolitical tensions and some pretty serious financial developments as well. So let's just get right into it. First off, this war in Ukraine is now escalating in a very significant way with Sergei Lavrov, that is the Russian foreign minister, now claiming that Russia is engaged in a real war with the West. And so Lavrov is saying that the hybrid war is over and it has been replaced with a real one, which the West has been preparing for a long time against Russia. And he made these comments during a visit to South Africa, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But he's claiming that the West is trying to destroy everything Russian, and a lot of this has to do with the weapons that are flowing into Ukraine. Now, this is all coming just a couple of weeks after this fellow here, Nikolai Patrushev, the Russian Security Council secretary, made the claim that Russia is now fighting NATO in Ukraine, not just Ukraine itself. So both of these top Russian leaders now claiming that Russia is essentially at war with NATO. And again, a lot of this has to do with the weapons flowing into Ukraine. Notably, the most recent development is this delivery of Leopard 2 tanks to the Ukrainians from Germany. Now, Germany kind of halting, trying to stall this, not wanting to send these tanks over there initially. And finally, they had made the concession that they would send Leopard tanks if the U.S. would send M1 Abrams tanks. And now, today, we've got this report from 3 U.S. officials who are familiar with the deliberations on this topic, and they are saying that later this week, the Biden administration is expected to make an announcement. They're just finalizing the plans now to send Abrams tanks to Ukraine. So that means Germany is likely going to be sending their Leopard 2 tanks, and this marks a significant escalation. We've already been sending a lot of weapons over there, billions of dollars of weapons. We've sent those HIMARS, long-range rocket artillery pieces, which have been a real headache for the Russians to deal with, and now we're going to be sending over main battle tanks. Now, this might take a little while to have some significant effects on the battlefield. Ukrainian soldiers are going to have to be retrained to use Western armaments. Most of them are familiar with Soviet-era stuff. Nonetheless, clearly, according to the rhetoric coming out of folks like Sergei Lavrov, this is viewed as a major escalation by Russia. And just to take a quick look at this Wikipedia page here for the M1 Abrams, I mean, I'm sure it's a fine tank. I mean, I'm not a military guy, so I don't know too much about it. It looks like it's top of the line, though, I'm sure. But the thing I want to really draw your attention to here is the price tag. Wikipedia says there's an estimate that it's $8.92 million with an inflation adjustment. There's a citation needed, so, take that exact figure with a grain of salt. But the bottom line is these things are expensive. And so this is going to be, more high-tech, expensive weaponry being sent over to the Ukraine war, being paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. And the Treasury now telling Congress that it is going to suspend federal retirement investments. So basically holding these federal pensions hostage until the debt ceiling is raised. And at that point, Janet Yellen tells us that the retirement fund is going to be made whole. Now, I find this to be a very interesting story because while they are talking about suspending investment in this investment fund for federal pensioners, those weapons and the money is still flowing to Ukraine. So it really shows you where the priorities are. So anybody who is relying on a government, entitlement or whatever you want to call it, I know a lot of people don't like to call Social Security an entitlement, just realize that sending these payments out is not really the government's top priority. So it really illustrates nicely the counterparty risk of all of these various assets where folks like the Federal Reserve or the U.S. Treasury are the counterparty. They talk a lot about how, the U.S. doesn't have a history of defaulting on its obligations when they discuss the debt ceiling, but actually the U.S. has defaulted on obligations in the past. I mean, Nixon taking us off of the gold standard was a default of sorts, defaulted on our obligation to provide gold in exchange for dollars. So don't be surprised if you are receiving government benefits if they either get slashed at some point in the name of austerity or if they end up getting paid out in worthless devalued currency, because I believe those ultimately will be the two options available. Now, if you want some assets without counterparty risk, you can check out SD Bullion. There's a link down in the description. It's today's video sponsor. They do have a nice sale going on right now on silver bars. Pretty much all of their silver bars, they got 5-ounce bars on sale, and then 10-ounce through 1,000-ounce bars are on sale. Some good deals over there. I think kilos are about $1.89 over spot, and 10-ounce bars are only about $2 over spot as part of this sale, which is pretty nice to see the premiums on 10-ounce bars coming down. So I might be picking some of those up soon, especially with, the slight pullback we've seen in the price of silver lately. I like to buy when silver's, a little weaker, a little softer, rather than on these days when it moves up. So might be doing some stacking soon. Now, South Africa, I mentioned that Lavrov made these comments on a visit to South Africa. Also, notably, South Africa is going to be having these military drills with Russia and China. So this is basically a BRICS military cooperation drill. And I think that, we're going to see more of this as time goes on, as these geopolitical lines are kind of drawn between East and West. You're going to have the US and the G7 kind of on one side, and then you've got the BRICS nations and a lot of the world's developing economies on the other. And right now, this is more of a loose organization, but I think that we're going to see more and more military cooperation between these folks. And there's a very notable aspect of this story that I want to draw your attention to. It's a little bit speculative, but it's also a little bit alarming. And that is that these Russian warships armed with hypersonic Zircon missiles are going to be part of these drills. So these Zircon missiles are supposed to be some of the best in the world. They're hypersonic. They're very difficult to intercept, to defend against. And Russia has these nuclear-capable missiles on some of its frigates, on some of these ships. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, this guy, Dmitry Medvedev, he is the former Russian president, and we've been hearing some of the most hawkish rhetoric in this conflict out of this guy. He made the claim that he was calling for warships armed with these hypersonic Zircon missiles to be stationed off of the waters of Washington, D.C., somewhere out there in international waters in the Atlantic. And obviously having these hypersonic nuclear-capable missiles just off of the U.S. Capitol, 30 miles off the coast or whatever it is for international waters. I mean, that is seriously escalatory. And he was calling for that. And then we got this story today. Now, this is the speculative part, but supposedly there is a Navy frigate armed with these missiles that has diverted from its course. So it was supposed to be sailing to South Africa, but then it turned west towards Bermuda, and these satellite tracking websites have been following this ship, and they claim it's out there in the Atlantic heading west towards the U.S. coast. So again, it does seem like this is perhaps a little bit speculative, not entirely sure that this is being confirmed by multiple sources, but something very alarming that we should all be looking out for, because if we start seeing the Russians ratchet up the rhetoric against the West and simultaneously are stationing nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles off of our coast, obviously that is something to be worried about in a very big way. Now, moving on to the financial aspect of things, this is the data for the major foreign holders of Treasury securities, and we just got some new data for November. Now, interestingly, we actually saw total holdings of U.S. Treasuries among major foreign holders increase from October to November from $7.13 trillion to $7.273 trillion. So net, these foreign holders were buying U.S. Treasuries from October to November, but notably, China continues its sell-off. And actually, these numbers for October for China were revised lower. So if you take into account the revision and then a further sell-off from October to November, bringing them down to $870 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries in November, that represents a decline of about $190 billion from the beginning of 2022. And we don't know yet how these holders finished up the year. There is some lag in this reporting. November's the latest data, but clearly de-dollarization is alive and well. If Western allies are buying U.S. Treasuries, China is still dumping them in a very big way. I mentioned South Africa having these military drills with Russia and China. Something else that they're going to be doing is holding the 2023 chairmanship of the BRICS Congress. So they're going to be meeting later this year, and their ruling party has been pushing the idea of admitting more members into the BRICS organization. And I think that there's one member in particular that they really are eager to admit, and that is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, we know, has expressed an interest in joining BRICS, and likely that could occur towards the end of this year. And at the same time, the Saudi finance minister, this fellow here, Mohammed al-Jadaan, at Davos just last week, he told Bloomberg reporters that Saudi Arabia was open to talks on trade in currencies besides the dollar. And so he's talking about ending the petrodollar system here, basically. Now, he did kind of hedge his statement. He said that China and Saudi Arabia do have a strong strategic relationship, but then Saudi Arabia also has a strong strategic relationship with the U.S. Pretty certain that if Saudi Arabia does end up joining BRICS, then we are going to see some kind of bilateral trade agreements between Saudi Arabia and the BRICS members, notably China, who is the biggest buyer of Saudi oil. They're probably going to stop paying in dollars. They're going to be paying in yuan or possibly gold. There's also the gold-backed stablecoin that Russia and Iran announced last week. And so there's a lot of options here for the Saudis to utilize other than the dollar. But if they do that, that is a major development, because as Saudi Arabia goes, so will the rest of the OPEC members. And, there's this thing, it's like a network effect that you get with a currency. When a nation like Saudi Arabia, who dominates the export market, denominates their sales in dollars, it makes everybody else do that because it just is convenient. Everybody's transacting in dollars. It's a network effect. So the more people that use dollars, the more people want to use dollars, just so that their trade with these other folks is made simpler, made easier. But if we start to see countries dumping that, then that could be a runaway thing. And the weaponization of the dollar is what is driving all of this. And that doesn't look like it is going to be ending anytime soon. And so likely the de-dollarization is going to continue. Is 2023 going to be the year that the Saudis begin accepting a currency other than dollars? Who knows? But it is likely coming down the line. And that is going to be very bad for the dollar. Now, in addition to de-dollarization and all these other threats, one of the things that they were warning about heavily at the World Economic Forum, this is the World Economic Forum website, at this recent Davos meeting, was the threat of a gathering cyberstorm, or an age of massive cyber warfare. And I think that they are onto something here. Perhaps they are foreshadowing something that they have foreknowledge of, who knows, or perhaps they just can see the writing on the wall, and they understand that when this era of escalating global conflict, if it doesn't come to, a nuclear exchange or open kinetic warfare between Russia and NATO, then at least there is a strong likelihood that we may see dramatic escalations in the realm of cyber warfare. And on that note, on the vulnerability of our financial system, just today, this morning, when the New York Stock Exchange opened, they had to halt trading in dozens of major securities because of what they're calling technical glitches. So, maybe that's all it is. It does remind me also, a couple weeks ago, this is a report from a local news station because I couldn't find too much coverage in the mainstream media about this story, but Bank of America was having some issues where customers were finding that money was disappearing from their accounts. And ultimately, according to Bank of America, this wound up being the result of a glitch with the Zelle payment system. Payments were showing up and then disappearing. It caused a lot of havoc for people. There were a lot of videos going around on social media of people waiting in Bank of America lobbies demanding answers from the tellers, and all the tellers would tell them was call customer service, call customer service. And they'd call customer service, and they weren't getting anywhere with that. And so people were understandably very upset. But I think that this is really just like a little bit of a preview of what is likely coming when the money's really not available. Now, were all of these problems at the New York Stock Exchange and at Bank of America the result of glitches? Maybe. Or maybe the cyber warfare is already on and we're just seeing it kind of slowly escalate as the forces kind of feel out the vulnerabilities of the other side. But if it was really just technical glitches, that also kind of gives you an idea of how vulnerable the financial system is. If at the best of times, when there's no cyber warfare, stocks are getting halted and deposits for customers are missing, then what's it going to look like if a cyber attack really does occur? So just another reason to get some assets outside of the electronic financial system. Numbers on a computer can disappear overnight. Big reason why we like to hold physical, tangible assets outside of the financial system like gold and silver bullion. It's also a very good reason to have some cash outside of the system. I mean, let's say that the banks go out for a week. Well, you might not need to tap into your gold reserves, but might make, grocery shopping and paying your bills and doing daily transactions, just having some cash available could make that a heck of a lot easier if you can't access your bank deposits. I mean, imagine if you wake up and your credit card doesn't work. Just run through that as a mental exercise and see how quickly you run into problems. So make sure you are prepared for that. And as far as the rest of this SHTF news, folks, it doesn't look like things are getting any better anytime soon. I mean, like everybody out there, I hope that the world returns to some level of sanity, but I don't have my fingers crossed, and that's why I think it's important to get prepared. So, get your beans, bullets, and Band-Aids in line. Have the stuff you're going to need to survive and the means to protect it. And that's all I've got for this one, folks. Thanks for watching, everybody. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.